Saddam Hussein, the man who ruled Iraq from 1979 to 2003, remains one of the most controversial figures in the modern Middle East. To some, he was a symbol of defiance. To others, a ruthless dictator. His rule was marked by absolute control, military ambition, and an almost mythic cult of personality. But beyond the politics and the power, Saddam saw himself as more than just a ruler. He was a thinker, deeply influenced by the ideologies of his time, Ba'athism, Arab nationalism, and revolutionary socialism. He never wrote a formal book of philosophy, yet his speeches, writings, and even his novels reveal the mind of a man who viewed the world through a distinct, almost prophetic lens. This essay dives into that hidden philosophy, exploring Saddam's beliefs about authority, nationalism, revolution, history, and the very structure of power itself. The purpose here is not to judge, but to understand, to uncover meaning in a vision that both built and broke a nation. At the heart of Saddam's political soul lay an unshakable devotion to Arab nationalism. He was both a product and a champion of the Ba'ath Party, whose foundation rested on three pillars: unity, freedom, and the rebirth of the Arab world. To Saddam, the Arab nation was a single historical body, once mighty, then divided by colonialism and weakened by internal discord. But he believed its rebirth was inevitable, a destiny that would be achieved through struggle and revolution. This worldview was teleological. It saw history as a mission. The Arab people, in his eyes, carried a divine purpose: to rise above fragmentation and restore their collective greatness. His nationalism was both nostalgic and forward-looking, romantic in its longing for the glory of the past, especially the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate centered in Baghdad, yet modernist in its embrace of a powerful state, planned economy, and the transformative force of ideology. Unlike racial or tribal nationalism, Saddam's vision was built on culture and civilization. In theory, it transcended ethnicity and sect, portraying the state as guardian of Arab unity. This gave his ideology a sense of universalism within the Arab world, though in reality, Iraq's ethnic and religious diversity often made that vision difficult to sustain. When it came to power, Saddam viewed it not as a system, but as a weapon. He saw the state not as a neutral body of administration, but as a revolutionary machine, an engine designed to reshape society. Power, to him, had to be used with precision, strategy, and sometimes with brutal force to create a new reality. In this, his philosophy mirrored Leninist thought more than liberal or traditional Islamic models of leadership. At its core was a belief born of Iraq's painful history, that weakness invites conquest. Having lived in a land scarred by colonial control and surrounded by geopolitical threats, Saddam came to see strength, especially military power, not as mere necessity, but as a moral duty. Saddam's regime was not content with merely defending Iraq. It sought to reshape it. Through nationalization, he aimed to command the economy, through propaganda, to command the mind, and through surveillance and coercion, to command the very soul of the nation. For Saddam, power was not just a shield. It was a creative force, a tool to mold history itself. This revealed something deeper, almost metaphysical, in his vision of rule. He saw himself not merely as a protector of Iraq, but as a man chosen by history, a symbol of Arab resistance and revival. His leadership was more than political, it was theatrical. He used architecture, art, and language to weave a sense of destiny around his image, as though Iraq itself were the stage and he, its central character. In Saddam's worldview, leadership stood at the heart of all meaning. He did not see himself as a representative of the people in the democratic sense, but as the living embodiment of the nation's will. It was a vision reminiscent of Hegel's philosophy, where the leader becomes the synthesis of history, the point where past struggles and future hopes converge. This belief manifested in his highly personalized form of governance. In Iraq, under Saddam, the leader was not just a politician. He was the teacher who instructed, the father who protected, and, at times, the martyr who suffered for his people. His face was everywhere, on classroom walls, street banners, government buildings. Children memorized his speeches, and citizens grew up seeing no difference between the man and the nation itself. This omnipresence was not born from vanity alone. It carried philosophical meaning. Saddam believed in charismatic legitimacy, that a leader's right to rule comes from his sacrifice, his vision, and his ability to bind a divided people together. Where institutions were weak and fragile, he sought to replace them with the coherence of his own persona. In a land scarred by coups, sectarian divides, and foreign interference, Saddam was convinced that only a strong, unyielding leader could preserve sovereignty and continuity. His worldview was deeply marked by anti-colonial rage and anti-imperialist conviction. To him, Iraq's modern history was a tale of betrayal, from British colonial domination to American interference and the constant meddling of regional rivals. He saw his role as the man who would end that cycle of humiliation. For Saddam, defiance against the West was not just political strategy. It was ideology, a moral and historical mission. For Saddam Hussein, true independence went far beyond driving out foreign soldiers. Freedom, he believed, demanded strength, the strength to build, to produce, and to define one's own identity. It had to be military, economic, and cultural all at once. When he nationalized Iraq's oil industry in the 1970s, it wasn't merely an economic decision. It was a declaration of philosophy. By reclaiming Iraq's natural wealth, Saddam saw himself reclaiming the nation's destiny, turning oil into the lifeblood of sovereignty. Even his boldest and most controversial actions, the invasions of Iran and Kuwait, can be read through this same lens. To many, they appeared as reckless acts of aggression. But in Saddam's mind, they were part of a grander vision. Flawed, perhaps, but aimed at reshaping the regional balance of power in favor of Arab independence. His defiance during the Gulf War, and later his resistance under the weight of UN sanctions, were portrayed not as arrogance, but as acts of survival, a stand against what he saw as neo-colonial domination. Though Saddam often used Islamic language and imagery, especially in his later years, his core philosophy remained deeply secular. He believed that the state must stand above religion, not to erase it, but to protect it from division. To him, the government's duty was to defend national identity, not theological doctrine. Yet, he was no enemy of faith. Saddam saw Islam as the soul of Arab culture, a vital source of unity and moral order. When he invoked religion during the Iran-Iraq War and again in the 1990s, it was both strategic and symbolic, a way to strengthen cultural authenticity during moments of existential crisis. In his framework, religion served a civic purpose. It offered moral discipline, social harmony, and a sense of shared destiny, but it was never to rival the authority of the state. His view mirrored the logic of Hobbes. Religion was essential for order, yet the sovereign must always remain supreme. Saddam's writings also reveal a man obsessed with history. He saw Iraq not as a modern creation of colonial maps, but as the living heart of ancient civilization, the land of Mesopotamia, of Babylon and the Abbasid Caliphate, of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Under his rule, vast resources were poured into archaeology, museums, and historical research, all designed to weave modern Iraq into a story that began thousands of years earlier. This philosophy of history served many purposes. It legitimized his regime by grounding it in ancient greatness. It instilled pride in a weary people, and it gave meaning to the present, framing Iraq's struggles not as chaos, but as another chapter in an eternal saga of loss and renewal. To Saddam, history was not linear but circular, a cycle of betrayal and rebirth. He often spoke of the tragedies endured by his people, and how endurance itself became a kind of victory. In his worldview, suffering, when faced with dignity, did not weaken a nation. It purified it. It affirmed identity and transformed pain into pride. In that belief, Saddam found both his justification and his mythology. Economically, Saddam's vision was built on centralized control, a philosophy aimed not at equality but at independence and modernization. Drawing inspiration from socialist traditions, the Ba'athist regime nationalized vital industries, invested heavily in infrastructure, and redistributed wealth during the oil boom of the 1970s. Yet this was not socialism in its pure or global sense. It was a uniquely Iraqi model, state-led growth rooted in national pride. Saddam did not dream of a classless society. He dreamed of a self-reliant one. To him, the economy was not a space for personal ambition or free competition. It was a weapon of sovereignty, a tool to bind the nation together. Every institution, from schools to newspapers, echoed that control. Education, media, and art all served the same purpose, to reflect and reinforce the will of the state. Philosophically, this revealed his vision of the citizen, not as an individual standing alone, but as part of a grand collective mission defined by the leader. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Saddam's philosophy was his relationship with death and martyrdom. His regime glorified sacrifice and treated struggle as a virtue in itself. He often spoke of martyrdom not as a purely religious act, but as a political statement, a declaration of loyalty, endurance, and meaning. To die for the nation, in his eyes, was not tragedy. It was transcendence. This belief revealed the theatrical core of his rule. Saddam viewed leadership as a destiny, a curse he had to bear rather than a crown to enjoy. He saw himself as a man chosen by fate, condemned to carry the weight of his nation's survival no matter the cost. That image reached its peak during his final years, his trial, his imprisonment, and his execution. Even in the face of death, he refused to kneel. He recited verses, invoked the nation, and faced the end with defiance, as though crafting one last act in his lifelong performance of sovereignty. There was, in those final moments, a strange existential undertone, the belief that true authenticity lies in embracing one's destiny, even if it leads to destruction. Saddam's last gesture was not an apology but a statement that even in death, power could affirm itself through endurance. His philosophy was never formal or academic. It did not follow the structures of Western political theory, but it was deeply ideological, historically aware, and passionately devoted to transformation. He believed that the nation was sacred, that the leader was its living will, and that power was the divine instrument through which destiny was forged. In Saddam's worldview, Arab nationalism, revolutionary authority, cultural revival, and tragedy intertwined. Though his regime eventually collapsed under war, sanctions, and internal repression, the intellectual framework behind it remains a subject of fascination. It exposes timeless contradictions between unity and diversity, strength and justice, memory and power. To study Saddam Hussein is not to absolve him, but to understand how ideas can both inspire and destroy. His philosophy, however flawed, however destructive, was a coherent attempt to answer one of the oldest and most haunting questions of modern history.